Hello, this is Cassandra Arnold, and I'm presenting the first of the two mini art school projects that I selected for week 4. This is the Create Patterns project from the Design Basics Index on page 147. What attracted me to this particular project was that we could um, do more practice on the various design elements that we've been learning over the last 2 or so weeks to really kind of get a better feel and handle of the concepts. And what I also attracted me to this is the fact that it's involving vector-based graphic software. Not so much the software, but I actually have a personal appreciation for vector images. So this is an example of a vector image that I actually have on one of my Pinterest boards. What I love about vector illustrations is that it does use simple shapes like squares and circles and rectangles, and just how they apply the different like color elements like saturations and hues and placement and depth. You really end up with these like really beautiful landscapes that you might see in a still life and things like that. So I do think it's a really great use of technology and really nice visual aesthetic, and that's part of the goal of the experiential learning that I want to create for young people, is to show how something so unexpected and so simple, just using some creativity in your imagination, can become really spectacular. So what I first did to start out with experimenting in these patterns is brainstorming, similar to what I did last week, just sketching it out. And by no means do I expect that any of my vector graphic images will look like the previous slide, but I do have a liking for how you use shapes to create those types of landscapes. So I thought at least a few of my patterns would involve some of those repetitive shapes. So here I plan to use, some triangles for this mountain winter scene. I also sketched out a few other seasonal landscape scenes. And as suggested in the book, I had a kind of a repository of shapes. And this was all just brainstorming. So Microsoft Word, it's something I'm familiar with and used to, especially in terms of their design capabilities and formatting. So I thought, let me start there. Then in terms of the selection of the tool, I selected Adobe Illustrator. What I like about it and Web 2.0 technology in general is there is some familiarity across different apps. Like these are very familiar menu options, so the navigation isn't completely foreign to you. Like I can surmise from this, this relates to text, relates to dragging or pointing of some sort. This probably has to do with filling or color. This has to do with graphics, and this is photos. Also, what I liked about Adobe Illustrator, I mentioned in a previous blog that I've done some flow charting, and this section here reminded me a lot of the flow charting software has like these wells, these libraries, repositories where you can store different shapes, and this is actually what this represents, this library. So using the help, I identified that you can definitely search for shapes. So I decided to try to use that. I, opened up into a new file. Then I accessed the library option to search for shapes so that I don't necessarily need to try to figure out how to transfer my shapes from Microsoft Word into Adobe Illustrator. And as you can see, you could just go under that search feature, and I typed in shapes, and it did pretty quickly give me a very comprehensive list. And you use that option to download, and it is now in my library. However, I found that, okay, in dragging and creating the shapes, it drags the entire image stencils, which is absolutely what I don't want. So got a little frustrated with that. So I said, okay, I tend to like tools that are intuitive. So I decided to start, playing around with the commands here. And one nice thing about Adobe Illustrator, it has like some type of recognition. So it saw that I was trying to create shapes freeform, so it kind of directed me to what this is a shaper tool. So as you can see, when I started doing something freeform based on what it looks like, Adobe Illustrator kind of gives you an idea of, oh, is this the shape you're talking about? And that was wonderful. Where it got a little tricky and like tool intensive, I'll call it, is like just trying to drag and drop into the various sections of the drawing plane that I wanted. So I wanted to make sure, yep, I'm on the selection tool and I want to drag this. So that took a bit of time and energy, and I'll say creative energy as well, just in the navigation, because I kind of knew what I wanted to do and the different patterns that I want to create, but then I got kind of caught up in trying to maneuver in the tool. But still, I do like the fact that when you do drag, you have these placements and then you have these guiding lines so that you are assured that your items are aligning. Still, it did get to be a little frustrating. So I decided to kind of take that, the Adobe Illustrator offline a little bit. I did get as far as trying to recreate my mountains. So these are small triangle within a larger triangle. And like I said, using some familiarity with just windows in general, you have the option of placing an image center front. So that gives you that effect of a shape within a shape. I was trying to do some type of 3D effect. That's what this means, but I couldn't get rid of the actual grid line box, so I decided to go offline and do more of the pattern brainstorming using Microsoft Word. So this is where I started with my mountain. And then I gravitated towards trying another landscape, like a springtime summer landscape with my clouds. Here I didn't really focus so much on the white space, negative space. So it was just really working in the patterns. So repeating, these is basically copy and paste and pasting repeatedly, and that gave me this nice row formation. And I just kind of stretched the images to create kind of like a tree shape and stretch the clouds as well. So here I was just focusing on kind of like just the shape and the contour, and like the color saturation was really bold here. Um, Here I decided to work a little bit more with dimensions, creating like a little house, kind of like what we saw in that Pinterest vector image, using these shapes. I decided to add this very simple 3D with another 3D that had kind of like some shading that made it seem kind of shiny to give it an effect. And I played with some color a little bit here. Um, and so not so much worried about like just I'm focusing on the image so much and some of the repetition within the image, and not so much trying to use the whole palette. Here is where I started getting a little bit more creative and trying to kind of fill up the space and not just be about shapes, but kind of creating an experience. So this is where I kind of wanted to create a basket. This started off with just being the basket. And then I said, well, this could be a basket or it could be something else. Nobody would necessarily know. So that's where I decided to add some flowers. But then instead of it, it looked like it could be cotton candy or something, or some type of red food item. So that's where I started playing around with the patterns, and try to give it some texture and contour, as well as this was a deliberate pattern choice too, to kind of give you the same kind of veins that you might see in nature as opposed to just a green, dot or something. And then this particular shape, which is like a teardrop, I used that to kind of, and I stretched it and rotated in different ways to kind of reflect, like leaves usually have different shapes and positions, especially when you're putting it in a vase. So the way I kind of went about that was, initially, like I said, I was just trying to playing with the gradients and the different shadings and things like that. Um, and as Word is more cumbersome, like as you can see, to have to rotate it into the particular shapes and sections that I need. But one nice thing is that you have these sensors here that help you to shape the item a little bit better than I think what you could do 2, 3, 4 years ago. But as you can see, it does take time. You do need to be a little bit more precise as opposed to Adobe Illustrator, which really lines up the items nicely for you, and the spacing works more, I think, instantaneously. But still, it was fun. I felt I was being really creative. And then, as you see a problem or an issue, it's like, well, what about this? Well, can I do that? And things of that nature. So I thought that was pretty fun when you're exploring things in low tech, and because you're kind of focusing more on the creative output rather than, well, why can't I get the tool to work a certain way? That's why I decided mostly to use my patterns and create my patterns using the kind of low tech method. And I got even, I think, a little bit more creative than just, focus on the individual, repetitive patterns within the design. So like here where I started with the, basket of flowers, I decided to then in using more of the surface area. I decided to kind of explore a little bit more with the framing and the contrast, doing more color contrast. This was a repetition that I created from just copying and pasting this 3D element again, and I decided to use like complementary colors to see how that would stand out. And I kind of like it because it seems almost like it's moving in a sense with the corners being so close together and the different color contrasts. That was really fun. And the negative space, I think it works well here because if you had a lot of activity going on here, you really wouldn't see really the contours and see like the vibrancy here of the corners. So I continued on and did some more with just maybe not such a bold. It's still bold. Black and white is very much opposites, but not so much saturated in terms of like the color previously. But I still kept some a different color in the borders to see how that would work with the dimensions. And then I also just started playing with same colors, like what happens if you use different grades. This really doesn't, it's not too saturated, it's not too shaded, but as you can see, it gets lighter and lighter and see what kind of effect that might have because it's still two-dimensional, it's still one shape. Also, just trying to use this one, working without borders, without frames, without contrast, just looking at the repetition to see if it still has that kind of 3D effect um, as well. And so, feeling a little bit more confident, I went a little bolder with the patterns. I don't know, maybe I was thinking about my lack of a kitchen backsplash and trying to recreate that effect. You have the shiny with the matte with the texture. So this is essentially just this quadrilateral shape and using the different gradients and shades. Here's the first color. This is more solid. It's the same color, but, different grade. And then this was a textured pattern that's actually available here. So I used the marble texture. And this was kind of fun. So it kind of gave me a little bit more confidence, as we were saying. You know, because you have the Web 2.0 and Microsoft features that are similar, there's definitely gradients and pictures and things like that that I could use. So I went back to Illustrator and tried to use that effect. And then I actually copied and pasted some of the images as well. And I came up, what I liked about it is that I can actually see more definition. And so what I did was I kind of repeated some of those patterns and tried to work through creating some of those additional landscapes. So what I love is you really see the contours of the shapes here in Adobe Illustrator more than you did in Word. This was actually a stencil that I copied and pasted in, just using the basic copy paste feature. Um, and then I hand freeform this in Adobe Illustrator to kind of give you the idea of like a sloping hill or something like that. And then again, this is like a banner stencil that I kind of used and put together using Adobe Illustrator. And what I like is it aligned it a lot better, even though, I still have work to do. Um, and so what I really like is the definition of the lines. You see the depth a little bit more crisper and the ability to align your stencils better in Adobe Illustrator. So with a combination of low tech and a little bit of high tech, those are the patterns that I came up with.